All right, it's episode 19 with Carolina Teague, and this is
Mm.
Sports Talk mostly. Hello, how are you? Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited about this episode.
Me too. Okay, so let's just do a quick, just three questions, do a little icebreaker so the audience can get to know you a little bit better outside of sports. And then you can tell us a little bit about what you do in sports, okay?
Okay.
Cool. So, first question. If you had to choose one actor or actress to play you in a film about you, who would it be?
Um, Angelina Jolie.
No. Why her?
Because she has big lips and I have big lips too. So I feel like I like her. She's beautiful. She's a great actress. So I would want Angelina Jolie to play me
I
in a
feel like
movie.
I agree with you. That is a good choice for you. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so then on that note, if you're an Angelina Jolie fan, pick one to be for a day. Hero or a villain?
Oh, villain.
Yeah.
She plays such a good villain. So yeah, I would
Yeah.
definitely love, yeah, I would like her for her to be a villain.
Gotta spice it up a little bit. Villain.
Yeah.
Villain. Okay, question number three. Last icebreaker. If you had to pick one food to eat at least once a day for the rest of your life, what would you pick?
I feel like I do it already. It's tacos. I always eat tacos no matter what.
Because you're Mexican, right?
I'm Mexican, so breakfast, lunch, or dinner,
Yeah.
a taco works.
Uh, you know, breakfast tacos are so underrated. Like, I crave me a good breakfast taco. They're so good.
They're so good. What side of what part of the country are you from?
I'm in Oregon.
Oh yeah, girl, down here it's like an everyday thing. But no, breakfast tacos are so good. You need to come down here and in Texas and you need to have the breakfast tacos down here. They're so delicious.
I definitely need to. It's on my bucket list
Yeah.
now. I'll come stay with you.
Yeah. I want to go to Oregon too. I was just looking at
Let's do
stuff.
it.
Yeah, we need to switch. I know. I wanted to go. Like the Oregon trails are so beautiful,
There is a lot
so
of nature to
beautiful.
see out here. There's like
Yes.
you'll go see one spot and you're like, oh my God, I want to go there and there and there. Like just like even on the way there or on the way back to wherever you're like staying.
Oh my
There's like
gosh.
millions of outdoor spots and sites to see out here. So it's awesome. But also I've heard that the food in Texas is like unrivaled. So
Super
I'm a
unrivaled,
I'm
but
a foodie at heart.
I know I wish, if it was together combined, it'd be like perfect. Oregon views with Texas food, it'll be a
Yeah.
wrap. Yeah.
So tell the audience who may not know who you are or what you're about or what you cover. Tell us a little bit more about that, what you cover, what networks you can be found on, and all of the things you talk about in sports.
So I have a show called The Sports Time. It's on from each Sunday from 10 to 11 a.m. on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, and I host it. We basically talk Texas sports, cover the Spurs. Obviously, I'm in San Antonio. We definitely cover the Spurs. I definitely cover youth, like college football right now,
Right.
Texans, Cowboys, and hot topics. Whatever I feel like talking about, that's what I'm talking about.
I love it.
I also write for Sports as Told by a Girl. So
You also do something that I thought was a little interesting because I am just I'm getting back into professional wrestling and you are a ring announcer, which I thought was
that's
so
right.
cool. So don't
That's
leave
right.
that out.
That's right. I totally forgot I'm a ring announcer. We actually have an event in 2 weeks. I'm a wrestling ring announcer. It is so much fun being a ring announcer. I love hanging out with all the wrestlers. They're so amazing. I just love wrestling. I love wrestling fans. I love
Yeah.
being a part of a wrestling company. It is so much fun. So much fun. And I'm so blessed to be a part of River City Wrestling. I love it.
That's so awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, I'm getting back into it. Like I was into it as a kid and then didn't watch it a long time. And my man is a huge wrestling fan. So we watch a lot together. And yeah, definitely learning a lot about like, the modern day professional storylines and things like that. It's all really exciting. So I thought that was really cool. So I'm like, I have to include that about
Yeah, and I forgot about it until you reminded me. So yeah.
Sometimes when you dabble in a little bit of everything, you're like, what do I do?
What do I do? Who am I? Yeah. Yeah. Who am I?
We both are super excited because you wanted to come on the show today to talk about something that it means a lot to me. As some of the people that have been following me and the show know that cannabis in sports is very much in my wheelhouse, and that's what you wanted to talk about. There's a lot going on in that department. So tell us a little bit about what was the reason you wanted to come on and what motivated what you have to say.
You know what? What reason? Well, one of the things is we really can't talk about it on air. I mean, we can, but we really can't deep dive into cannabis in sports. And one of the reasons why I'm heavily invested into cannabis in sports is because, or just cannabis in general, is because I was never a follower of cannabis. Like, I never really knew what it was all about. I always thought it was taboo. And a lot of people in Texas, they have that taboo feel because Texas is still legal in Texas. So, I'm just tired of it being illegal in Texas and the taboo that surrounds it. When I was in college and I was getting my bachelor's degree, the majority of my papers and my thesis were on cannabis. And that is when I developed a love and appreciation for cannabis, because I started doing my homework, I started doing my research, and I slowly started to realize that this is not something that is bad. It's actually something that is really good. So that's when I started to truly appreciate what cannabis is all about. And anytime I'm able to educate people on the benefits of cannabis, I am so for it. And I cannot wait for the day that Texas legalizes cannabis.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that. There is obviously, God, you guys have how many MLB teams in Texas?
Yeah.
So I just looked up some of the basic rules and regulations regarding cannabis in some of the major leagues. And so in MLB, they recently removed marijuana from the banned substance list and are basically operating by state laws. So there's no driving under the influence and not showing up to the ballpark high. If any players appear to be under the influence during team activities, they will undergo a mandatory evaluation for whether or not they need treatment for substance abuse or whatever. And that players who break the state marijuana laws will be punished, which is understandable because if it's a state by state law, you can't really stand in the way of a player knowingly breaking a state law. If they're possessing or using cannabis in a state where it's illegal and they get busted by cops for it, then that's their own fault, kind of. So with MLB specifically, I tend to go right to the more recent story of Tyler Skaggs, which we're learning so much about that specific story about what was going on within the organization and how he was actually given that fentanyl that ended up, he overdosed on and it took his life. And for me, that is one of the reasons why I'm such a big advocate for cannabis, is because fentanyl is used for controlling pain and managing pain. And you do not have to turn to things like that when you can utilize things like cannabis. So in MLB specifically, how do you see it? What are your thoughts? Do you have anything specific to say about MLB?
Yes, I was really happy that they removed it from their banned substance list. That was a huge milestone because I believe they were one of the first professional leagues to completely rule it out of a banned substance list. I thought that was a huge milestone. And I was hoping that, other leagues would follow suit shortly thereafterwards. But the whole thing with, and this is what I saw a lot of talking points in sports radio when they had brought this up, you just can't show up, high, or you can't show up on, well, you don't expect your professional athletes to show up drunk, right? So naturally you should, I don't think a professional athlete who carries himself to a high caliber would want to show up to a practice high, because they're not showing up to a practice, on cocaine. They're not showing up to well, I mean, you never know. You
Yeah.
never, but they're
Right.
not showing up drunk. They're not showing up on cocaine. So I think like the mentality for the athletes that are in Major League Baseball should have that same mentality all over. Do not show up high, and you'll be fine. You know,
Right.
you can. You're right, and it's just a simple rule. But I do really like that they removed it from their banned substance list. But yeah, I think it's just the same thing. Treat it like don't show up drunk, don't show up high, and it's very, very simple.
Yeah, I just hope
Mhm.
that with the MLB, I hope that there's somebody within the organization who is calling the shots that understands that, like, if I'm a baseball player, there's a huge difference between me toking a joint before I come to practice and me rubbing like a CBD topical oil on my hip. You know, because obviously there is a huge difference between those two things. One will get you high, one will not. You know, when you use a topical substance like that to help with muscle pain or an aching joint or, you know, past broken bone or something like that, it doesn't affect you like that.
Right.
So we haven't yet. There has been no drama, but I just hope we don't run into, like I said, any gray area with the MLB and then like finding a topical on a player and like telling him that he's under the influence because he used a topical. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know what? I think that I don't foresee that happening because they've already like pushed the ball, like moved the needle by even making this announcement. So I think that the MLB, whoever made these decisions, already have a good sense of what marijuana provides to athletes, and I don't see that happening. If it does, then that means there is there's, I don't know, I would say there's a bad, what is it called? A bad seed, or what is it? A bad egg? Yeah, a bad egg.
Bad apple.
A bad apple in the bunch. Yeah. And they need to remove that bad apple. So that's what I think. I think that they're on the right track. I don't see that happening unless, like I said, there's that one bad apple that doesn't want to listen, that doesn't want to open their eyes and just wants to be closed-minded. Then that's when I think that would happen.
Definitely. Yeah. So transitioning a little bit to NBA, to your point, the MLB is still the only major league that has completely removed marijuana from the banned substance. Now, during the NBA's 2020-2021 season, when they were in the bubble, the cannabis testing was halted, but just this past summer, just this past off season, the players that chose to participate in Team USA were subject to the World Anti-Doping Agency, which we'll talk more about in just a bit. But despite the Team USA testing, the league still hasn't like announced or like made it clear that they'll be testing players for either, they haven't tested for Summer League, and they have not made an announcement that they'll be doing cannabis testing for the 2021-2022 season, which will start in October. But we do know that Alex Caruso had a marijuana charge over the off-season break, like right after they got done. And we didn't see any disciplinary action with that. So it alludes to the future of that becoming a little bit more similar. But again, as you said, you cover the Spurs. So what do you see it? How do you see it? Do you know, are there any mumblings out there as far as media and what they think as far as, you know, Spurs and the players? Obviously still only medically legal in Texas. So
I don't even think it's medically legal, is it? I don't even think it's medically legal.
I think it's medically legal, but from what I understand, it's very difficult to get.
Yeah, like super difficult. Like you have to be like very, very, like you have to have like, it's like true epileptic type situations. Yeah. And it's like, you cannot get a hold of it here, like period. So Alex Caruso, he was actually, he was stopped in Texas and he was found with a very minimal amount of weed, and that it was in a grinder, which is ridiculous. And it was his face plastered all over the media. He's labeled as you're stupid. Why would you do that? Blah, blah, blah. Like, bro, it was like a dime baggie, like whatever it wasn't that serious. And to pull him over, to charge him, to arrest him for that reason, to me is absolutely ridiculous. And I think these cops here in Texas They just need to, get a grip. And I think they're just trying to meet their quota. No offense to the cops, that do a great job. Shout out to all my police that do what they do a great job, and just are great police officers who are stopping crime. But I feel like just having weed in a grinder and taking someone to jail for that is absolutely ridiculous. Yes, it is illegal, but there's tons of things in Texas that are illegal. Back to the point of the NBA, though, the NBA somewhat has been lenient for a while now. I remember I listened to a podcast with Matt Barnes a few years ago. I think it was like 2-3 years ago. Matt Barnes had said that the NBA, they do test for marijuana, but they test you within a 3-month window, and they tell you when the 3-month window is going to be.
Right.
So if you're going to be tested, let's just say, I don't know what the months are, but it's April, May, June, right? If you're going to be tested, then don't smoke in March because it takes 30 days to get out your system. Once they test you, then you're good to go. You can smoke all day long after that. So I think the NBA for the most part is lenient. I think they've gotten more lenient, like you said, but they're lenient for the most part because they have that window. They tell you when the window is going to be. That's why you hardly see NBA player busted for marijuana, because they know when they're going to be tested.
Yeah.
You have to be really
stupid.
Yeah, you would have to be really careless. Yeah, you have to be careless. You would have to be very careless to, get caught with marijuana in your system in the NBA, because when you're going to be tested. That 3-month window is there. Don't smoke weed 30 days before, and then when you're done getting tested, have fun and do your thing. So I like that the NBA is lenient in that sense, where they give you full awareness of what they're going to do.
Right.
But they still haven't reached MLB levels. So they still got that little
yeah, they still have
spot to go. Yeah.
That one little hurdle to get over.
That
wish
one
they
hurdle
would too, because I feel like the NBA is so influential in like taking new stances like that it, I got to give the MLB the credit that they deserve for being the first to do it, but it's like so widely unpublicized that like not even a lot of people know that it's a thing. But if the NBA did it, it would totally be a thing. It would be everywhere.
Yes, for sure.
And so
for sure.
I just like, when it comes to the name of pain management and these guys getting some sleep when they're on a road trip, we had the hilarious story that I could never get through without laughing about Dion Waiters being on the plane with the Miami Heat and falling asleep and all of that stuff. So, I feel like falling asleep because you ate an edible is a lot better than having a stomach ache or being sick to your stomach because you took the wrong painkiller or something like that,
That, or being drunk out of your mind, getting behind the wheel, killing a family of 4. The most you're going to do and I always said this, the most that you're going to do if you're high and you're passed out is worst thing you're going to do is go to the top of the fridge and steal the Cocoa Puffs at the top of the fridge.
So true. Yeah, so true.
That's the worst thing you're going to do. Yeah, exactly. That's the worst thing you're going to do. Period. So it is what it is.
So in the NFL, as recently as I could read, as June 2021, the NFL's collective bargaining agreement approved that by team owners remove the possibility of players being suspended from games over positive tests for any substance, not just marijuana, only during the season. So during preseason, they can still be tested, and that's when they have to abide by a specific like nanogram or milligram or something like that. Mm-hmm. But there has been a lot of changes like recently to the NFL's policies about cannabis. So it was very difficult to find a very clear answer about what they're currently doing going into this season. But I believe that's what's happening is it's only being tested during preseason, and then you can't be suspended from games over a positive test. So if that's correct, that's cool. Again, it's like not being widely publicized that that's the case, but there, like I said, there's a lot of intricacies to it. There's that whole nanogram, milligram thing when you get tested that you can't have a certain amount in your system, which I disagree with. Like if you're going to do it all the way. You know what I mean? So what do you think?
The thing that bothers me about the what are we talking about, NFL? The thing that bothers me about the NFL and their collective bargaining agreement is that the collective bargaining agreement lasts 10 years.
Yeah.
So who's to say what's going to happen in 10 years when it comes to legalization of marijuana in the United States? And most of the states are already catching on, except for the very few, like the one that I'm in.
Yeah.
But, but my thing is like, then they'll have to go back and they'll have to do an amendment and up to that collective bargaining agreement. Then they'll have to revise that whole situation. The rules are still unclear.
Right.
So I think, they did this collective bargaining agreement. It's a 10-year deal. And, I don't think that they looked into the future when they created the rules for cannabis and the collective bargaining agreement. So that's one of the things that I disagree with fully with how the NFL handled that situation. There was nobody in that room or wherever the negotiations were between the NFLPA and the NFL.
Yep.
There was nobody there to kind of forefront that future, that foresight of where cannabis will be. And I think that was honestly like one of the most important things to me in the collective bargaining agreement.
Definitely.
And I don't know why it wasn't to everybody else, but for me it was. And I just was like, they should have pushed a little bit harder.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, they should have pushed a little bit harder to fight for, cannabis, and especially NFL. Like the NFL, their CT, the people, like you get CTE like crazy.
Thank
and
you.
Marijuana and cannabis and cannabis usage has been known to they're doing testing. They're still unclear, but there's a lot of tests that a lot of scientists have been doing. There's a lot of data out there that cannabis and cannabis usage is able to have adverse effects on CTE. So if that's the case and that research is there, they could have used that as a bargaining part for that particular CBA agreement. So that part right there is what really rubbed me the wrong way. You think the NFL of all leagues will be the first ones to be able to be like, hey, look, this is we need to what is the MLB? They say it's not on the banned substances. They should be the first one to forefront that, especially with all these players who have CTE and all this brain damage from taking all those hits year after year since they were children. I definitely think that the NFL is behind. And to me, out of all the leagues that are in American leagues, that is the one league to me who is totally dropping the ball. And it's not because of I just want cannabis to be legal everywhere, but the research is out there that it helps with the adverse effects of CTE. And you guys are not at the front of that line trying to forefront everything when it comes to cannabis and, allowing their players to have usage. You don't have to show up to the practice high, but at least allow them to smoke a joint at the end of a game because they got hit like 6 or 7 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the one that makes me mad the most.
No, and I totally agree with you. I second everything you just said. I think that for being, excuse me, considerably the definitely most violent sport of all of the major leagues, it should definitely be the NFL that is trying to advocate for and protect their athletes, both past, future, present. You know what I mean? We've seen so many. I mean, look at Ricky Williams. He has fought his whole career and afterwards for cannabis legalization and cannabis being removed from the banned substance list in the NFL because of his personal experiences with the hits, with the CTE and all of that stuff. So it's like you have guys that are living proof of the fact that they have said, no, I'm literally going to choose weed over football in this instance because it's the only thing that helps them feel okay.
Yeah, and the guys who are dead and they take their brains for scientific purposes, that data is there in their brains. That CTE is a lot of trauma. And you would think that if there's research that marijuana helps with the effects of that problem, and then you wonder why these NFL players, not all, some of them are just, have mental issues for their own reasons. But I feel like a lot of the reasons why a lot of NFL players have these mental issues in the first place is because of taking all those hits throughout all those years. And there's a lot of evidence to back that up.
Yep.
If they should have been in the front of that list, and that's what makes me upset about it.
Yeah. And it makes me upset because the players are the guinea pig in the whole situation, and they're the ones who are, I mean, we see NFL players die young year in and year out. You see these ex-NFL players that are dying in their 50s and their 60s. when they could have had otherwise long lives if they would have potentially been able to use cannabis or use even access, deeper cannabis products like RSO to help protect their brains and help repair even a little bit of the damage that they've done to their bodies in football. Because it's so sad that, like I said, they just become these guinea pigs for CTE, and it's like, it gets nobody nowhere, it seems like.
Yeah, it's a really sad day. And then, that lack of foresight in the collective bargaining agreement is the part that makes me mad the most.
Right, because nobody had the presence of mind to be like, well, what if we get a very progressive president in the White House that decides to federally legalize cannabis within the next decade after we sign this bargaining agreement? Do we have a clause or something in place that like automatically removes it or, automatically does something to nullify a punishment or what have you in that regard? Like, there was no even verbiage, to your point, that suggested that they might be prepared for something to happen in that way, in that manner.
Yeah. And you know what, right now, like, I'm interested right now, I'm Googling, like, how do you get an amendment to a collective bargaining agreement? Like, what is the process? What is the steps to get an amendment to this? Like, how does this work? I need to do the research on that. I should have been prepared, but it looks like it looks like a whole lot of, like, you need to get lawyers involved is what I'm looking at.
I'm sure it's a lengthy process.
It's a lengthy process. Like, oh my God, they just dropped the ball, and that's what makes me mad the most. Yeah.
And that's terrible. And that's one of the things that is, if they have people, like you said, in the room who are able to at least know a little bit about cannabis, or at least able to speak to the advocacy of cannabis a little bit more, they might have had somebody that had the awareness to bring that to the table. Because knowing that it's such a lengthy process, hallelujah if it ever did, but if it ever happened where that became, something that was a real scenario, somebody would feel really stupid for not like making that a thing, I feel like.
Yeah.
So
I agree 100%.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, because especially the NFL, I mean, when you think about marijuana in general and the fact that it, was federally illegalized in the first place, it all goes back to, race, controlling people of certain races and all of that stuff. So then when you think about what the NFL, MLB, the NBA were and have been doing with this substance, it, especially in the NFL regard,
it kind of has some similarities. Yeah, don't even get me started.
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say, don't get me started. I can talk for hours. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Put the right people in the room. That's all I'm trying to say. Put the right people in the room, and that they wouldn't have that problem.
Right, exactly. So, and then that finally brings me to the World Anti-Doping Agency. Now, I know I'm skipping over some other leagues that, we've got NHL, all of that stuff, but the biggest story recently regarding cannabis, obviously involving the World Anti-Doping Agency, is the story of Sha'Carri Richardson, which so many other things have gone on regarding the Jamaicans and all that, but we're not even getting into that.
It has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
It has nothing to do with it. We're simply talking about the cannabis test that was taken from her when she was in my state, Oregon, when she was at University of Oregon at Hayward Field qualifying for the Olympics. And that's when she was drug tested. Obviously, shot rang out around the world, and she tested positive for marijuana, was banned from the Olympics. She had a small sliver of an opportunity to continue competing with, I believe it was the 4x1 relay team or 4x2 relay team. I can't remember. And then they chose not to, allow her to do that as well. So I just think, again, when it comes to Black and brown athletes, and you have these policies that automatically go against them, and it's on a world stage. Yes, I realize that the World Anti-Doping Agency does, fall in line with a lot of the foreign policies regarding marijuana. But when the biggest like participant of that agency has a lenient view on cannabis, I feel like it's time to kind of overlook it altogether. But it's like, if America as a whole, like our government doesn't take that step to federally legalize cannabis, I don't feel like the World Anti-Doping Agency would ever even give it a flick of an eyelid. So it becomes so important in so many ways because it's all tied together, as we've been saying.
Yes.
But I don't know. What's your perspective?
I think that that one was probably the most tricky one for me to have the opinion on, because I looked at all the factors, like, ultimately, you're not supposed to be smoking weed. If this is your dream, if this is what you want to do, if you're going to be tested, don't do it.
Right.
So, that in itself is her punishment, was not punishment, but not allowing her to do that set the tone for everybody else. Like, you're not allowed to do this under any circumstances. Yeah. And that was their way of setting the tone that nobody can get by this, or nobody can get by any kind of doping, and this is on our banned substance list, so you can't do it and you're not going to get away with it. So yeah. I feel like my emotions, like I have the emotion part and then I have the part that uses logic. The emotional part of me feels really bad for her, because the reason why she used it was because of her mother. I think her mother passed, right? If I'm not
her
mistaken.
Biological mom. She was raised by her grandmother, but her biological mom, who she had several ups and downs with throughout the course of her life, had passed away.
Yeah. And that's very devastating. I mean, even if you have the ups and downs, your mom's been in your life your whole life, or has never been in your whole life. Hearing that your biological mother has passed away is very, very heartbreaking. And I can only imagine the heartbreak you have of losing a parent. I haven't experienced that, and I'm not ready to experience that. But I know that when I don't want to speak it into existence, but if something like that were to happen to me, yeah, you better believe I might be smoking a lot, or I might be, going through some stuff, whatever, going through something, trying to cope with it in certain ways. And I feel like the way that she chose to cope with it wasn't a dangerous way to cope with it. So my emotions tell me this was not a dangerous way she wasn't doing hard drugs. She wasn't consuming alcohol in a dangerous way. She was simply smoking a joint and trying to relax her mind. It helps with anxiety. It helps with depression. You and I both know the benefits of smoking weed. The unfortunate part is that I have to remove my emotion, and the part that's like, you knew you weren't supposed to do this and you did it.
Yeah.
So that is the part where it's like, it's hard to, find that, like, okay, you knew what you did. She took the L and she's moving forward from it.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. Whether we know she would have placed in front of the Jamaicans or whatever, that's another conversation for another day.
Totally.
But the whole point is she missed an opportunity because of the fact that she made that decision. And I feel really, really bad for her. But, when you know what's happening, just like the NBA players, if they get caught smoking marijuana, you knew the test was coming. Why did you do it?
Yeah.
That's the only part where I'm like, okay, but I totally agree with you that, and that's a good point that you brought up. If the United States set the tone for, legalizing it on a national scale, it may be easier for other countries to follow suit and making the policies more lenient for the World Anti-Doping Agency, and that would help out tremendously. So I think that the United States has a responsibility to lead that, what is it called? Blaze that trail.
Lead the revolution.
Get it. Start a revolution, blaze that trail, no pun intended, and get it, get that started, so that way everybody can follow suit. I think all the countries all across the world need to understand the foundations of why marijuana is illegal. They need to understand that this was all propaganda by William Hearst and Henry Anslinger.
Yeah.
And this was all based on race and bait propaganda, because the hemp industry was stronger than the paper industry at the time. And these people who had high influential parts of in the media were heavily invested in trees and paper, and they wanted to shut down the marijuana and hemp industry, and they did that by any means necessary. Nobody ever does their homework or research on that stuff, but that is the reason why it's kind of taboo all over the world, was because of major propaganda.
Right.
When the United States follows suit and they decide to legalize it for the right reasons, for the reasons of the fact that the criminalization of marijuana was based on race baiting and propaganda to line the pockets of the elite in the United States, then at that point, I think other countries might be open to follow suit and to do the right thing, to look at the benefits of what marijuana has to offer and eliminate the chances of people like Sha'Carri Richardson, who are grieving the loss of their mother and are trying to cope in healthy ways.
Right.
You know, it helps them be able to participate in sports that they have been training for their entire life. And being able to participate without any repercussions, because it is not fair that she was not able to participate because she smoked a joint, when I can guarantee you there was other Olympic athletes who were drinking a glass of wine at the end of the night after a training workout, and they had zero repercussions for that. And alcohol is far more dangerous than smoking a joint. And that is my final thoughts on that.
No, I love it. I totally agree, because that's kind of what I personally loved about when the NBA decided to take away the testing during the bubble season. It was like, okay, well, you know, that's kind of a good nod, because you have these players like CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony who are super into their wine, and they love telling the homies about their wine. And there's not an issue with that. But why can't Dion Waiters have an edible and chill in his hotel room and relax the same way that Melo gets to relax with a glass of red wine? You know, so it all ties together, as we've been saying pretty much the whole episode. So I'm glad that we got a chance to like actually like sit down and talk about it on an episode, because it's something that I have talked about like throughout the entirety. That there's those like little seeds throughout the entirety of the podcast of me talking about it. So I'm glad there's now like one episode kind of just dedicated to it, because obviously with the Sha'Carri thing, it's kind of been prominent in the news, and we have seen a lot of adjustments throughout the start of COVID, as we've seen not just athletes, but people in general, citizens, coping with mental health and trying to control their alcohol use, or maybe, you know, having revelations and self-realizations about their alcohol use and turning to cannabis because it is healthier and things like that. So it's great that it is slowly happening on a national scale with these leagues, but it really would be great if somebody, NBA, cough, cough, Adam Silver, could just kind of like throw the 1-2 punch and like do it and just say, hey, look, we're no longer not even testing for it. We are not even turning an eye if one of our players gets, you know, like Alex Caruso, caught in a state that hasn't caught up yet. Because it's time.
I agree with you. And I'm so glad we had this conversation, because I feel like you can relate to me, you know, when it comes to like just being pro marijuana and just pro, you know, benefits of it. And, you know, seeing someone like you who does their research just as much as I do is so refreshing. Yes, so refreshing.
I agree. No, when I saw that on the time, like the tweet that you tweeted that like made me contact you, and then we set this up, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting, because especially knowing that you're in like the wrestling circuit, obviously there's been a lot of, we haven't even really touched on it, but there's a lot of, you know, cannabis support and cannabis advocacy in the MMA, the boxing, and the wrestling world. So it's nice that it's hopefully all kind of coming to one level playing field.
Yeah, and that's another one too, that I think boxing is a huge sport that CTE is like big on. And I think boxing also, you should be able to smoke weed if you are in boxing as well. So there's a lot of sports that can benefit from allowing people to smoke marijuana. But, you know, it is refreshing because, you know, there's people who are so close-minded. And the reason why we connected was because there was an A&M player, Texas A&M player, who was suspended indefinitely because he was pulled over because they smelled weed in the car and they found weed. And his career, his football hopes and dreams are thrown away because they smelled weed in the car and they felt the need to, they had, right to search his car, and then found that illegal firearm, which is another part that kind of has something to do with it. But at the same time, they would have never searched his car
Right.
if they would have, if the weed wasn't there. So, it's just kind of like sad that these laws and these rules affect a certain demographic more than others.
Yep.
But that's another topic for another day. And, we would be talking all day long.
I know. We'll have to definitely like get on a part 2 because like saying, we could talk about it forever. There's definitely a lot of stories that are not exact to that, but pretty similar to that, where somehow, some way an athlete has gotten themselves caught up and lost, opportunities on a pretty major scale because they've decided to be involved with cannabis, which it shouldn't even be an issue. So it's sad that it even has to come to that for some athletes. So hopefully people like us talking about it can bring a little bit more light to the situation, motivate some people who may not be as aware as the two of us are to, get on Google, ask a friend, ask a trusted, adult. If you don't consider yourself an adult, go ask a trusted adult about cannabis and about the benefits of it, because there's a lot to be learned and there's a lot to be shared. So
I totally agree. And last but not least, I want to make this point. There's a lot of people in Texas or just all across the country who are very, very close-minded about cannabis. And I just hope that they open their hearts to seeing the benefits of it, seeing the truth about cannabis, understanding the history of it, understanding, why it's illegal in the first place. And hopefully those people who the people who are against it, I hope that their heart softens. And I also want to make it clear that I'm so pro cannabis, and I have been accused of being on drugs because of that. And I want to let people know that just because I am pro cannabis and I am pro marijuana legalization does not mean that I'm on drugs. All that means is that I'm educated.
Same here. Yeah, I'll say the same for myself. I'm an open cannabis user. I live in Oregon. I use cannabis daily. I have lupus. I honestly probably couldn't function if it wasn't for cannabis, and it prevents me from having to be on medications that would make my life a lot more difficult and, could potentially even create more symptoms for me. So there's a lot of people out there that are in my same shoes, if not on a bigger scale. It has helped so many people in so many ways, not just athletes. And I did have another person on, God, she was on like my second episode of the podcast, second or third episode of the podcast. Her name is Anna Simons, and she's a rugby player and former soccer player. And she is with an organization called Athletes for Care. And that is an organization where several athletes, both current and former, have basically come together, much like Al Harrington and Allen Iverson and Matt Barnes, who all support cannabis, are, consider themselves cannabis advocates. So if you know anyone, if anybody is listening who knows anyone, or, just want more information, Athletes for Care is another great organization that is helping to connect athletes with safe and accessible cannabis, resources and information. So I don't know if you know about Athletes for Care, but now you do.
I do now. And so everybody listening, so I'm really excited to take a look at what it entails. And I think anything that helps the cause, I'm all for it.
Yes, I totally agree. So thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go and get on with your day, tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find you online, how to get more of your content, where to listen to your shows, and all of that stuff, if you can rattle off as much as you can.
Sure. Yeah, you can listen to me from 10 to 11 a.m. on 9:30 a.m. The Answer. My show is called The Sports Time. I'm the host. I'm located in San Antonio, but you can listen to it live on the iHeartRadio app all over the country. You can listen on Apple. You can listen on Spotify. I have the podcast link. It's in my bio. I am also doing River City Wrestling, ring announcing. You can follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at Carolina Teague _. You can continue the conversation with me there. And of course, I just wanted to thank you, Taylor, for inviting me on. I'm so happy we had this conversation. It's so refreshing. And this is something that my heart has been wanting to talk about for a long time. And I just feel like we definitely need a part two
Yes.
because I feel like the story isn't over yet.
Yeah, definitely not over yet. There's a lot more to talk about in this conversation, but I'm glad we were able to connect and give you at least a little bit of a platform to talk about it. So feel free to, direct your listeners to the podcast, and when it works out or when we have some more news to talk about, we can bring you on for a part two.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.